Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Impacto AZ, a podcast dedicated to centering Latin voices on the important issues of the day. I'm Jonathan Higuera, co-host of Impacto, and I'm here today with my co-host Juan Rodriguez, who is the executive producer of Impacto. Welcome, Juan.
Hello.
Today's guest is David López, a renowned civil rights and employment lawyer who is a law faculty member at Arizona State University. He's also the founder of the university's newly launched Civil Rights, Migration, and Workplace Law Initiative, which is bringing together community members and academics on important issues of the day that are impacting local and national communities. Thank you for being here today, David.
No, it's my honor. It's always great to catch up.
Before we get started and jump into the issues of immigration and the Supreme Court decisions, I just wanted to get everyone's take on the outcome of today's Mexico-Ecuador soccer game at Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. I know by the time this podcast airs, the result will be known, but let's see here who among us has the soccer chops to pick a winner. Let's start with you, Juan. Who's going to win today's match?
Well, I gave my friend George Chorsky over at Superfans a call today in Chicago, and he says Mexico 800, Ecuador -5.
Don't take the over/under on that, whatever you do.
No, I think I'm leaning towards Mexico, at least 2-0.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
that's a good one. How about
Yeah.
you, David?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's hard for any team to go into Estadio Azteca, and I think Mexico's been flying high in a lot of emotion. With that said, Ecuador's a very, very strong team, and I think they started to find their groove in the last game against Germany. So I'm saying Mexico 1-0.
Okay. All right. Well, your thoughts were echoing mine, David, on that they are playing in their home stadium where they're virtually unbeatable. But, saying that, you got to knock on wood because there comes a time when you're going to get beat. I know Ecuador is a lot stronger than people give them credit to. They pretty much beat up on Germany, although that game didn't have too much ramifications for Germany at the time. So I'm going with El Tri 2-1. So we'll see. We'll find out.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, also, I don't know if for our listeners out there, what's interesting about this game, other than the game itself, is the political backdrop. It's my understanding that Mexico and Ecuador don't have diplomatic relations right now. Mexico recalled its ambassador a while back over some protest and break-ins at the Mexican embassy.
Really?
Yeah.
And I saw a news story not too long ago that said Ecuador has been dealing with a tremendous amount of violence. New drug routes are going through their country, and it's created this whole rise of gangs and violence and cartel activity. So, which was tradition, which was too bad because Ecuador, in my mind, was always touted as one of the more peaceful South American countries. I know some people from there who were very gentle people who I really loved. Okay, well, let's see how that all plays out. But in the meantime, we have these three big decisions that came out of the Supreme Court starting last week that we want to discuss today. The one was effectively gave the Trump administration the power to end temporary protective status for Haitian, Syrian, and other refugees. Another decision that basically gave the administration much greater latitude or gave them a pass to turn away asylum applicants at the southern border. And the big one that came out today, which would be on a more positive note if you believe immigrants are important to the social fabric of this country, that rebuffed the executive order that Trump had instituted back in 2025. So that would have disallowed U.S.-born children of undocumented parents or temporary foreign visitors to not be automatically granted citizenship. So those are the three ones I wanted to cover today. Where shall we start? Anybody want to jump in?
I think we have to start with the Birthright citizenship case. That was the last decision issued this term. Justice Alito in his dissent called it one of the most important decisions in the last 100 years. And I think that's the one that everyone was waiting for. And just so you know, the way I do it is there's a website called the SCOTUS blog, and they actually have a live feed when the decisions come out. So I've been getting up early and just sort of watching the decisions as they come in, trying to process them, particularly the one today, because I knew I had a couple of interviews that I just wanted to kind of go through that. But I think
Eh,
Trump v. Barbara is a big one.
Were you nervous that the court actually would have, ruled in favor of Trump on this one, of the Trump administration?
No,
It
I
seemed
wasn't nervous because I think I'm a court watcher. And you can't always tell based on oral arguments, but sometimes you get some pretty strong clues. And you figured, just from the questioning that Justice Roberts and Justice Comey Bryant, two Trump appointees, seemed to be very skeptical of the administration's arguments. And so when you add two to three, you get the five. I think, so you never know with this court, to be honest, but I think all of these decisions on the immigration space, for the most part, have been actually fairly predictable. And I think this decision basically affirming, birthright citizenship under the Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, I think that went as most people expected.
Mhm. Right, right.
And
So
that doesn't mean there's not a lot of little surprises in the lead up to the decision, including, the question why the Supreme Court even took this case, if every lower court who looked at it found it to be a pretty easy case and struck down the executive order.
yeah, the fact that it rose to this level, does it give the court a little bit of cover since they had some other decisions that weren't quite as, well received, if from a pro-immigrant point of view, at least? So now they can say, "Well, but we didn't strike down birthright citizenship, even though we can now turn away people applying for who want to apply for asylum if we can keep them from reaching the US soil."
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna say that. I think some people will, and some people will say that between the tariff decision and this decision and the decision the other day with the Federal Reserve Commissioner, that Trump suffered 3 losses in front of this court, and that just shows that they're calling them as they see them. But I think, especially on immigration and civil rights matters, this has been one of the most conservative Supreme Courts we've ever seen. And so, this whole issue, many people sort of viewed it as a manufactured issue, as a way to you know, um, kind of tap into like the grievance of the base and sort of cast a shadow of belonging over 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 these families and over all of us. Um, and I think that the fact that the decision at the end of the day on the constitutional issue was 5-4 should raise a lot of alarms. And Trump today on Truth Social said he was disappointed with the decision, but he's going to push for congressional legislation, basically banning birthright citizenship, which is sort of the signal that he's going to keep this in the public sphere.
Right.
Whereas, 2 years ago, it was basically considered almost like foundational 14th Amendment law that birthright citizenship was required under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So
So what he's
so in many ways, even though he loses, he finds a way to win politically on this.
So what he says is, "Now we're gonna push Congress to pass this law." Huh?
Yeah, but the problem there is that, with the executive order, with any legislation, just like the executive order, it has to pass the muster of the 14th Amendment. So with the same configuration, it would likely be struck down. But he's either, playing the long game or hoping that he could come up with something that pulls over the Chief Justice or Amy Comey Bryant. But I think it's mostly the politics. Like he just wants to keep this issue out there that really, kind of sort of establishes this sort of idea of like citizenship through loophole that he's been sort of peddling, that, there's Americans, and then there's people who aren't really Americans. They just were born here at the right place at the right time. But that's all citizens. Like that's every pushing this. Like they all won the birth lottery. It's like they didn't do anything. A lot of them didn't serve their country. They were just born here. Like, you just
Right.
saw Megyn Kelly going around. What did Megyn Kelly ever do? She was born here, right? That's how she got her citizenship. She won the birth lottery. She didn't serve. As far as I can tell, she's never had to make payroll and done a real job in her life, right? But she's still questioning the belonging of others. And I think that's the whole project.
And that seems to be a little bit I read a little bit of, Clarence Thomas's Dissent, and that's kinda what he alluded to when he pointed out the Dred Scott decision was made in this environment where people who toiled and served and were ready to be called into military action deserve citizenship rather than those who, you know, as you just mentioned, didn't do any of that, just happened to be here. Um or
Yeah.
so the claim was made, which is
Yeah.
what do you think of that argument? It's
Yeah,
kinda
no,
crazy.
I mean, no doubt. He had the principled dissent, but I think one thing that's really super interesting, and I'll try not to geek out, but I think you guys will sort of appreciate this, is that Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown wrote a separate concurrence almost directly aimed at Justice Thomas's understanding of the 14th Amendment. And she said, hey, basically, the 14th Amendment is designed as a mechanism for anti-caste and anti-subordination. It wasn't just aimed at African American people, but that was certainly the impetus for the 14th Amendment. But the language itself is very broad and very capacious. And she basically said he's trying to like create tension between African Americans and the immigrant community. And
Mhm.
what she did, which was really, I think, beautifully done, and I was reading it before I came in, is she says, wait a second, this court sometimes has lost sight of this like so fundamental. They call it like the second founding of the United States, the 14th Amendment, so fundamental to the way we understand this country. And they've sort of turned it into something that it wasn't, but you have to get back to what it was, which is a way to address caste and a way to address subordination. And then she lists a lot of decisions, including recent decisions where she says the Supreme Court's not lived up to that promise. So that exchange is very, very powerful. And this is, she's become one of the most powerful voices on, this sort of originalist idea of the 14th Amendment. And in a way, it was ancillary to the case itself, but it really wasn't, because basically what the majority did is they're like the 14th Amendment, by its own terms, establishes birthright citizenship.
I like to weigh in on uh, the political fallout with Trump. Yeah, he's still trying to talk about it. He's talking about legislation, and like David said, it's within the context of the 14th Amendment. Any legislation that goes through, uh, it's keeping the topic alive. But fundamentally, this issue, even going back before his executive order, back to his first term, and even when he wasn't a candidate, he's always been hitting birthright citizenship. It's a fundamental pillar of Trumpism and of MAGA. I think this is a big blow to their agenda, and it's going to be long lasting. I don't see any relief for the MAGA viewpoint on this, and um, I think I think he has been weakened politically for this. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
yeah,
I mean,
that's a hard one, because I mean, I think he wants to keep it in the public eye, because I think
yeah,
he still
mm,
benefits, and he could say,
yeah,
"Oh, this is a bad Supreme Court decision," but we all know, these are perpetual foreigners, even if they nominally, according to the Supreme Court, are citizens, right?
right, yeah.
And I don't know how many people on this call, but I know at least one of us has been told to go back to where he comes from. And I'm like, New Mexico? I mean, like you ask those questions, you know, um,
I'm going back to Moline.
yeah, go back to Moline, like you go back to where you come from. And that's sort of the whole idea that, he creates in our community. And I think, parts of the Asian, and you certainly see with the Haitian community, this idea of being a perpetual foreigner, and he tries to reap the benefits politically. I'm sure he would have liked a big W here, but I think he's still pushing it. It's still going to be a big issue. I'm sure if you watch, all of his favorite channels tonight, you're going to see a lot of like, righteous indignation about the
Oh
decision.
yeah,
And what that does is that has a spillover to, our communities, that cascades out where we're marginalized, right? And you're from a city that has the largest number of veterans, most of them Latinos in World War II. Yet this sort of perpetual foreigner, theme that is part of this whole debate is something that they don't mind leveraging at all. Right. And I just think we have to at this point, like, not be afraid to name it. I'm sure he wanted the W one. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I just think I just found it interesting that he came out with the Truth Social post like 10 minutes later, like it's ready to go.
Mhm, mhm.
I expected that because he always has something ready to go in case something goes sideways on him. I mean, uh, he's never going to meet defeat. You know,
And
you know.
if I recall, he was at the hearing at the Supreme Court testimony when hearing the justices, and he wasn't happy with their line of questioning. So he probably had a line that this wasn't gonna go his way, although I'm sure he would never give up and keep pressuring them in every way that he can. But, can you imagine if it would have passed, though? I mean, would they then turn around and try and make it retroactive, so those of us whose parents were born in Mexico or whatever foreign country, now they're gonna start to go
Well,
after us? That
it
would
would be
certainly
Trump and
change the
Melania
equation.
also. They would get rolled
Yeah.
into this too. I mean, and so, it's supposed to be perspective, but I'll tell you, and I'm going to nerd out deliberately, is I teach, a first year course called Civil Procedure, which, some people think is like yucky, but we deal with the whole issue that was at issue in this case of domicile. Like domicile is basically a person's expressed intent to stay in a place. And it was even clear from reading like Alito and Gorsuch that domiciles are I know teaching it, it's a super complicated question, and so Gorsuch is like, well, what about the families? And he was sympathetic. He goes, what about the families who have been here for a long time, right? They've been here for a long time. Like we know that there are people who don't have, um, um, they don't have legal status, not because they don't want it, but because the the line is about 20 years long, or because of some, earlier minor infraction, they can't get it, right? But it's not that they're not committed to this country. Like, what about that poor gardener in California that was tackled by ICE and he's got 3 Marines? Right? Did that guy have the intention to remain in the United States? I would think so. He has 3 Marine sons, right? So it would have made it really complicated. But I think by pushing this and by the Supreme Court taking it, it keeps the issue in the public eye when 2 years ago it was just a completely marginal issue, right? And that's why sometimes I wonder if we should even talk about it.
Well, and he even without this decision in his favor, he's finding ways to deport, voluntarily sometimes or whatever, to deport people who were born here, right? When your parent or parents are deported, and you're born here, you spent your life here, but some of those kids are going to go back and join their parents in whatever country their parents are deported to. And I've been reading more and more stories about that's happening, that they're dropping out of school, it's curtailing their opportunities. And in some cases, they can't even prove when they want to come back that they have US citizenship if they didn't take enough documentation to prove that.
And
So,
they can't prove their
um,
residency either. Some of the people who've been deported don't have the established papers, so they're sort of functioning in limbo down there. I mean, that's just
yeah.
probably a whole other episode, but it's a human rights disaster. I don't know if you can call it anything else.
Right.
Yeah. Right, right. And another human rights disaster that's probably brewing are these other two decisions. I mean, temporary protective status has been around since what, 1990? I remember it well when I got to Washington, D.C., and I met a number of people who were there under TPS. Um, a lot of Nicaraguans at that time, more so than the Salvadorans. But I mean, it was meant to help people who were in places where you know, disaster or violence or uh, threats, where they could come and have some sort of life here until
Yeah.
things were straightened out. And essentially, does it mean that TPS is no longer uh,
No, no.
allowed,
No,
or is it
TPS
just
is in the statute, but I think for the TPS case and for the amnesty case, it's important to do some table setting. And the first thing is that both of these cases involve people who are trying to do it the right way, as they say. And so some people are like, well, I don't mind immigration as long as they do it the right way. And the people, the Syrians and the Haitians and the Venezuelans who were here on TPS, they went through the appropriate background checks. They had legal authorization to be here. They did it the right way. The people who were going to the ports of entry to seek amnesty were trying to do it the right way, right? And this is part of a broader campaign that you're seeing right now of delegalization. All these cases are about delegalization. So these are people who are trying to do it the right way. trying to secure amnesty under a congressionally passed statute, or trying to exercise TPS. TPS is temporary protected status, and a lot of the critics are saying, well, what about temporary do you not understand? And so there were two things about that case I just want to highlight. The first question is whether there's any judicial review of the revocation, right? So the court's like, you can't review it. Like, the administration gets to decide whether you have it. And the dissent says, no, they're supposed to go through a process. They didn't go through the process, right? So that's the kind of nerdy legal issue. There is a broader human rights issue in terms of our compliance with the international norms in terms of providing asylum. But one of the issues that was super interesting, and I've thought a lot about, and I can't shake it, is that there was an allegation that the revocation of Haitian TPS was based on racial motivations, right? And so they came in there and said, look, President Trump and Kristi Noem, they made all of these comments, right? They made all of these comments that were discriminatory and proves that, this was a violation of the 14th Amendment. And what the majority says, what a leader says, is all of those were race neutral, right? Those were race neutral comments. But that's been heavily criticized, right? And I just want to read you what Justice Kagan said, because it's so powerful in terms of the dissent of in this case.
Does this
And you might have,
apply to the comments that he made about their eating
yeah,
dogs and
I'm
cats?
gonna read it to you because it's super powerful. Because it just sort of shows, to me, it sort of reflected a almost like obliviousness. It to me, it almost like signaled that when they talk about color blindness, they mean blindness to racism, right? Because that's what was at stake. So Alito's like, hey, nothing to see there, folks. These were just policy differences. He even called the comments race neutral, right? But what Kagan said when she came after him is she goes, on the majority's view, there's a more plausible race neutral explanation of the termination of Haiti's DPS. The president's general stance on administration and its obvious antipathy towards past administrations is coming back. Okay, so what this decision will do is it's going to leave all of these Haitians, 400,000 Haitians and Syrians, in basically a deportability status. And this stands in stark contrast to the State Department's determination that it's not safe to be in Haiti or Syria right now, right? And
Yeah,
so, we're basically placing them in a situation where they either stay here in an irregular status, or they deported, or they self-deport or coercively deport back to these incredibly dangerous countries, right? But on the point of the racial comments, Kagan's like, you guys won't even say the comment. She goes, these statements by the president are so repellent and racially inflected that the majority declines to even put them in print. And the Department of Justice attorneys wouldn't say them. And then she goes through them, right? So these are the statements that are supposedly race neutral, not racist at all, right? Haitians are eating dogs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live in Springfield, Ohio. Haitians are also eating other things that they're not supposed to be. Haitians in the United States probably have AIDS. Haiti is a shithole country with filthy, dirty, and disgusting. Haitian immigration is like a death wish for our country. Haitians, along with some others, are poisoning the blood of our country. And why is it that we only take people from shithole countries like Haiti and Somalia? Why can we not take people from Norway and Sweden? So there's a whole series of comments that the majority is like, hey, don't look at these, and just sort of describes them as like race neutral, almost as if they're policy differences. And I just
right,
think that we have to name that and call the Supreme Court out on that,
right,
because it looks like color blindness means being blind to racial comments at this point.
right.
And this is not the
Eh,
first time they've done that.
Not, not to mention the fact that those who he did encourage under TPS were white South Africans,
Right,
right?
exactly, right.
Yeah,
And so it stands in contrast. And, I think that at a minimum, I mean, there were other ways that the Supreme Court could have ruled in favor of the administration, but they didn't need to give him a kind of a green light that this wasn't racist. And of course, the very next day, the troll Laura Ingraham goes on and she starts making similar comments, right? And now everybody who says that, it's like, those aren't racist comments. Like, the Supreme Court says they're not racist comments. I can make those comments, right? And so that part of the decision, I think, has come under a lot of criticism. And then the other case is one that they didn't really have to take. Okay. The other case was an issue, and it turns on, this is what lawyers do, and maybe why people don't love lawyers so much. But
This is the asylum case now
yeah,
you're
this is the
referring to,
asylum
right?
case, and this deals with what they call a metering policy, and it deals with the question of when someone arrives in the United States. So, open borders Biden, remember him, the guy with the
Mhm.
open borders? He had a policy that basically said that anybody who started to approach the port of entry to seek asylum would not be allowed to enter, and they'd be pushed back, right? Because he didn't want them coming to this country to seek
The turn
asylum.
back policy.
It's a turn back policy, exactly.
Now, the other case that we were going to discuss had to do with asylum and turning back people at the border before they reached U.S. soil, which reminds me of the whole situation with the balseros back in the 90s. I don't know what the policy was then, but I remember seeing stories that don't let them, if they were crossing the 90-mile strait, don't let them get to the beach, because if they get there, then they're going to be able to apply for asylum. Is that the same situation? Is that the policy that we're talking about now?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. The idea is like, when do you arrive in the United States? And traditionally, according to the Border Patrol, according to every interpretation, if you're at the port of entry, you're arriving in the United States, right? But what the turnback policy did is it pushed them back, often with the help of the Mexican and complicity of the Mexican National Guard. And so pushed them back so they could not present lawful claims of asylum, right? It's a long process. You don't just say asylum and get asylum, right? Biden administration, before that, I mean, this started with Obama. They're like, oh, we don't want all these people coming in and asking for asylum, so they were pushing them back. Um, and so the whole case turned on, what does it mean to arrive in the United States? And so one of the advocates on the case, who's spoken to my class, is like, the whole word in, arrive in, is one word, and lives are going to be lost based on the interpretation of that word. Because what often happened, especially during this period of time, is when they were pushed back, they faced a lot of violence in Mexico. A lot of them, were refugees. The border region was notoriously violent. If you remember, there was a whole incident with 50 Venezuelan asylum seekers who, were basically burned to death in a detention center in Juarez. And so, there's a lot of dangers. And what Justice Sotomayor meant is, like, you talked about the Balseros, but she talked about the USS St. Louis. That was the infamous case where Jewish refugees fleeing from Nazi Germany were not allowed into the country. And she's like, basically, under their interpretation, they would still be turned back, right? And then she
Right.
places it in a broader
A very
context.
notorious page in history for the U.S., knowing that we did not accept them.
And she reminds us that, hey, this is going to be a notorious page too. And then there was a question of why they even took this case, because that's not the policy anymore, right? And so it almost seemed gratuitous that they'd want to take this case. But I do want to kind of uplift the fact that, the whole meme of Biden as being open borders is really factually incorrect, as so much that is said with this administration, right? He did face unique challenges after the pandemic, for sure. But really, in the last year of his administration, he worked with Mexico to push back a lot of the immigrants seeking asylum to Tapachula, and that was also a human rights disaster that we don't see. Like, he just pushed them back, and the number of people coming in asking for asylum, dropped drastically. Right? He didn't do a great job. Biden didn't do a great job representing his record, and I'm not sure if that's a record. That's a question for philosophers and, any person with the heart to say, is that something to be proud of? I pushed a lot of people back to more suffering in Mexico, but actually the number dropped, right? The actual numbers of people entering the country dropped significantly during the last year of the Biden administration, right? And this case illustrates this. This isn't like, oh, Trump did this. This is something that Biden did, and
Mhm.
this was affirmed by the Supreme Court. And
And some of these disasters that you mentioned, I don't think they're top of mind for a lot of U.S. citizens. You're very deep into this research, but even me who tries to stay on top of it, those disasters have come and gone. The 50 Venezuelans that burned in the detention center, a vague memory of it. We don't know about so many of these disasters, these
Yeah.
travesties.
Or even why the Haitians are here, why the Syrians came here. But if you remember, there was a major civil war in Syria, and many Syrians were one of the major groups to migrate to Europe, seeking safety, right, in the United States as well, because Syria as a country imploded, Haiti as a country has imploded, and there's a long history
Mm-hmm.
of U.S. Imperial, I don't know how else to put it, involvement in Haiti through the years. Our record is very spotty in terms of relationship to Haiti, but at this point, it's a barely functioning and an extremely dangerous country, right? And and so the question of whether, as a policy matter, yes, it's temporary, but as a policy matter, whether the humanitarian disasters that led to the grant of TPS in the first place, have subsided. They just haven't. I mean, they just haven't. And the Supreme Court's like, it doesn't matter. The administration gets to make a call without judicial review. Um,
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to be granting many TPS applications to Venezuelans who were affected horribly by these recent earthquakes.
Yeah, well,
So
we already rescinded TPS. We're trying to rescind TPS for Venezuelans, but the broader context too is we have not had immigration reform since 1986. So you have like all these cobbled together parole programs and humanitarian programs and TPS programs that try to do everything that we want with an immigration system, just because Congress is unable to sit down and fix the problem. And I've always said that you can get like an eighth grade student government and they come up with some common sense solutions to these problems. But our Congress is just unable to do it. And a lot of that is because it's viewed as a political wedge issue. And indeed it has been. Like immigration has been one of the if not the central issue, leading to the rise of Trump and the Trump administration.
mhm.
So you see it in
And they
every.
know that. They definitely know that. And the things that they're going to implement now, um, the power they've been granted with a couple of these decisions, it's only going to make matters worse. And I sure wouldn't want to be a dreamer right now, where you thought you had public opinion on your side to gain citizenship and to gain legal status to be here, but they're on the list too.
Yeah. And remember the
Uh,
first administration, he rescinded the Obama executive order, and that was struck down by the Supreme Court for DACA. And DACA people have been deported, right? And then there's an
mhm.
effort to strip people of DACA status. So there's a real delegalization campaign that's going on right now. And I recently on my own podcast talked to David Beer, who's the executive director on immigration at the Cato Institute, right? So Cato prides itself as being a sort of libertarian outfit. And David Beer is like, I'm a Reagan Republican. I came out of that tradition. And
Mhm.
he's the one that got into like a big fight with one of the Southern senators because he used the term ethnic cleansing. He
Mhm.
says, what's going on now is ethnic cleansing, right? And I put my head down because I'm like, man, if I ever said that, shit,
Yeah.
right? I can't
A
say that, but he could
and I
say that.
was just about to
He
ask you
he's
the
like
end game.
a conservative, he's like a self-described conservative Republican, but he goes, when you look at the numbers they're talking about, he goes, what other term are you gonna use? Like they're talking about 200,000 people, right? What other term are you gonna use? And there was a recent article in the Guardian that shows that even though the immigrant population is not just Latino, that 95% of the people that are being affected right now are Latino, right? This is aimed at the Latino community. And then I guess it should not be a surprise that the other two groups that have taken a big part of the public relations demagoguery hit are the Haitian and the Somalia communities. I wonder if that's a coincidence, right? That both
Right.
the communities have been targeted.
Well, it's kind of coarse to say that really this administration wants to see brown people removed from this country. Um, they will never come out and say it like that, but their actions say otherwise. Um,
And we've moved beyond the what part of illegal do you not understand, right? Because now we're dealing with denaturalization and delegalization and people that have actually gone through the process the right way, right? So this is not just about undocumented immigration, and it hasn't been for a long time. This is about immigration more broadly, and particularly immigration from certain parts of the world. And y'all know as educated people that the U.S. has been very implicated in every single one of these parts of the world historically. And, there's a scholar, Laura Gomez, who says, we are here because you were there. And I think when you look at El Salvador and you look at Haiti and you look at some of these other countries, that is Afghanistan, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that completely hits the nail on the head.
Let me wind down this show by asking both of you, we're, by the grace of God, we're here as, either U.S. born or naturalized citizens. We've enjoyed all the rights, nominally, of what we should be getting as citizens of this country, but we see all this going on around us. So I'm going to ask you a little personally, how does it make you feel? Juan, I'll start with you, to see all this going on, all this targeting, not at us per se, but our people for sure. Um, any thoughts on
Well,
something like that?
yeah, I think when you put that up against the court decision today, um, it strengthens our argument, our conviction that we belong here and that we are a vibrant part of this country. We are an important part of this country. Um, and I think it's one of those. Thankfully, it went our way, and had it gone the other way, I think it would have taken the wind out of the sails of the movement out there. Um, we have to keep fighting, not just just not just because I was born here and was like David said, I just happened to be born here. You know, by chance, I won the lottery. You know, doesn't mean that I should not support those who are coming here and looking for what I have, what I was given, I
And
stumbled
maybe,
upon. The other on the other side, though, it's like a double-sided sword with the refugee court case. Yesterday, thousands of Syrian and Haitians went to bed protected. They woke up today and like, oh my God, So what do they do? Where are they at? You know. So it just it's this decision is a reminder of everything that we've been given or that we inherited, and it's incumbent upon us to keep fighting for those who are not who are playing by the rules and not given any opportunities. Like David said, these people they came to the port of entry, they followed the rules, and nothing, and solely based on skin color and the race of people. But I am happy that this case went the way we wanted it to go to, and and for me, I was born in the United States, but you know, um, my grandmother was an American citizen. I benefited from that as well, and many have, and I also, and when I think about that, David, you mentioned Megan Kelly, and that comment about people who haven't served. There's a big number of Latino uh, U.S. military veterans who have been deported.
Yeah, a lot.
You know, so it just irks me when people like Megan Kelly make comments like that.
yeah,
And to start with, yeah,
kind of reminds me of
And
that
I think,
saying I've seen, the one where they go, first they came for the blacks and nobody said anything. Then they
yeah,
came for then they came for me and nobody said anything. It's like for us, it's first they came for the so-called undocumented criminals. We didn't say anything. Then they moved beyond criminals to undocumented, and
yeah.
then they went from people who were here legally. um it's just like the progression keeps going, so like where does it stop?
and
David,
then
I'll
you
let
also
you have
see,
the last word before we
yeah, I mean,
sign out.
you also see in that progression, you see allies who have been arrested for protesting. You've seen the press who have been arrested for kind of speaking a truth to power. And so I think a lot of people do see this as a canary in the coal mine for a kind of greater authoritarian push using the technologies of immigration, surveillance and detention on a broader swath of the population. Hey, look, I can say, hey, all of us have struggled as all of us, most of us are mixed status families, or we know mixed status families. I've been told to go back to where I came from. I come from a community where the sheriff was held to have engaged in an unconstitutional pattern or practice of racially profiling. Like, we could always say, hey, there's a personal stake in it. Or we could, for me, like, kind of tap into the faith of my parents and say, hey, these are folks who are not franchised. They can't vote. They don't have a vote, right? And who speaks for them? And I think about that when I think of, like, the 8 mothers in Chicago that got arrested because they were trying to protect the families of their neighbors. Like, to be neighborly is not something that necessarily has to be based on a self-interest. To be neighborly is, part of every faith tradition, major faith tradition in the world. And to say, hey, wait a second, you know, as a citizen, right? I don't want to get in trouble for quoting Che Guevara, but Che Guevara would always say, "You're lucky to be in the belly of the beast." Like, we're citizens, and so we
Mhm.
could say, "Hey, I'm not getting racially profiled, or I'm not affected, or I'm not being surveilled," or we could say, as a citizen who was blessed to be born here, or lucky enough to be born here, we have an obligation now to speak up because we have the vote and we have the voice. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Like, the Haitians can't do it. The Syrians can't do it. Who's going to do it? Right. And the reason that there's so much punching down politically is that they're punching down on groups that don't have a voice, and they're going to get a third of the population that's going to kind of relish sadistically in the suffering of others. But I think the vast majority of people don't. And the vast majority of people, I think, have, love and justice and neighborliness in the heart. And I just think people need to speak up.
And with that, I think that is a good way to end this show. I want to thank you both for your comments and thoughts on this. And I hope we'll be seeing each other again soon. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, viewers, for watching this episode of Impacto AZ. If you liked what you saw and you would like us to bring you more content like this, please subscribe and like to our channel, and we can help make that happen for you. So with that, thank you and have a nice day.
Take care. Bye, guys.